Hello. America's best artillery cannon kinda sucks, honestly, and despite that fact, there are no plans of really making it any better. I am, of course, talking about the M109 howitzer, also known as the Paladin. I'm not saying it really sucks, I'm just saying it kinda sucks, and there's a big difference to that which I will be addressing later. Today, I want to talk about America's self-propelled gun fleet. Why every other country has, or is currently getting rid of Paladins, while we hold on to ours with a white-knuckle grip. Why it's just an okay weapon system, and if there's any point to having one at all. Or if there's even a point to me continuing this video, because I know every comment is just gonna say drones. But I don't care if the answer is drones. I want to talk about things that look like tanks, but are not tanks. Shake and bake the like and subscribe button and let's talk about it. The M109 Paladin, like I just mentioned, is not a tank, even though it has tracks, armor, a big gun on top, littler gun on top, and a chunky spinny part that more educated minds would call a turret. These are, in fact, self-propelled artillery guns, also known as SPAGs, or SPAs. For brevity's sake in this video, I'm just going to call them SPAs. They are, in essence, a 155mm artillery cannon welded on top of a tracked chassis and given some light armor. The idea behind Paladins, and all SPAs for that matter, is that mechanized forces that operate a lot of vehicles move around a lot, and it's a lot easier to just lower the tube and drive off than it is to tow a cannon, get it set up, and then immediately have to break it down manually. At their core, Paladins exist so armored units have something that can keep up with them while they're on the move. Pulling your gun on a moving platform allows for the cannon to be on the larger side of things, because you're driving it, not towing it. That's useful because A, mechanized forces often go up against other mechanized forces, so you need bigger rounds to take on bigger targets, and B, no one has ever called in artillery and thought to themselves, damn, I wish that explosion wasn't so big and awesome looking. Well, maybe you are if you're a nerd that works in the Fire Direction Center and worry about things like risk estimated distances or quote-unquote civilian casualties and target overkill. But just ignore those guys. They're just mad they're not allowed to pull the lanyard to make the thing go boom anymore. There's also C, the larger the round you have, the more technology you can put into said round, but that's a video for another time. Paladins were first introduced way back in 1963, and have seen nearly 20 wars since then, from Vietnam all the way to Ukraine, with the most current version being the M109A7, which started major production in 2014. While the newest version is obviously going to have major improvements in capabilities compared to the original, like rates of fire, speed, protection, accuracy, all that good stuff, at its core, it's still a 1963 design, and that does bring with it some limitations. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this thing only kind of sucks. Like, that much, maybe? I'd say that's fair. That isn't because they aren't accurate, because they are, or that they can't effectively lay down some serious scunion on some scared Uzbek conscripts, because they can, and will if I have anything to say about it. They fit firmly in the kind of suck category, not necessarily because they themselves are bad platforms, but because compared to the rest of the world, they're one of the least capable SPAs out there. The Paladin is the guy who peaked in college, not the guy who peaked in high school because that would just be sad, but peaked in college because they had some pretty decent success, but they just can't get over their early 20s and everyone else has already moved on. The first reason for that is its rate of fire because it's pretty slow. The best Paladin crew is going to max out at 4 rounds per minute, and that number can vary a lot because like their dismounted cousins, Paladins are manually loaded. An underpaid private is the one throwing that round into the breech, and the 155mm rounds it's shooting, by nature, are pretty damn heavy. That means how fast the Paladin shoots is going to be determined in part by the physical capability of the crew. Your first few fire missions might be running at 4 rounds a minute, but if it's a long day or even a long week without a lot of sleep, that number is going to go down. This is one of those cases where a tin of Zins and a white monster are in fact force multipliers. Most modern self-propelled guns use some form of autoloaders, or at the very least, semi-automatic reloading. France's Caesar can fire 6 rounds in a minute. Korea's K9 Thunder, which is based on the Paladin, can fire 8. Sweden's Archer can fire 9, and Germany's Panzerhaubitze 2000 can fire up to 13. The difference between 4 rounds per minute and something like 6 rounds per minute Might seem negligible, considering that you only need one of them to pink mist a squad of dudes, or turn the side of an IFV into a cheese grater. But it means that Paladins lack one capability that most other SPAs do have, called MRSI, or Multiple Round Simultaneous Impact. Not to be confused with the Midwest Reproductive Symposium International. I know that's a common mistake. But what is MRSI, you ask, on the verge of passing out, trembling for answers to my leading questions that keep my audience retention high. It's time for a quick geometry lesson. Ever since Pythagoras invented the hypotenuse before being thrown off of a cliff by his cult for banning the consumption of beans, that's real, look it up, artillery cannons have two angles at which they can fire. High angle, which is above 45 degrees, and low angle, which is below 45 degrees, roughly speaking. However, ever since Black Science Man invented physics as we know it today, there are going to be two corresponding angles that hit the same point with the same charge amount. If you're able to reload fast enough, that means you can fire multiple rounds at multiple angles with multiple charge settings, and all of your shots will impact at the exact same time. Hence the name, Multiple Rounds Simultaneous Impact. MRSI is great because it doesn't allow for your target to react to indirect fire. The time between the first round impacting and the second round impacting is usually more than enough for whatever you're shooting at to dive into a trench, hide behind a big rock, or get a vehicle into defilade. That means that the 20-second window between the first round splashing and the second round splashing is the difference between target destroyed and target now has a headache and early onset tinnitus. Paladins can't really do this. They can get close, they can kind of fudge it, but it's not quite the same. The second big thing with not having a high rate of fire is that it makes you more vulnerable to counter battery fire. If a fire mission for my gun is 6 rounds, I want to get those 6 rounds off before some other nerd with a radar is able to detect where I am and fire their own artillery rounds at me. The faster you're done firing, the faster you can get the fuck out of Dodge. Less time shooting, more time scooting is a good way to ensure your mom doesn't get a little triangle flag handed to her. Now, let's talk about the range of the Paladin, because half the point of artillery is that it can shoot really far away. The other half is that it can send dudes home in Ziploc baggies, but we've already touched on that, much like I was touched as a child. The Paladin's M284 cannon, with standard high explosive ammunition and favorable weather conditions, tops out at 22 kilometers in terms of range, or about 13.6 miles for us Americans and the 3 people from Liberia that watch my videos. With rocket-assisted rounds, that number hits a little over 30 kilometers, and upwards of 50 if you're using something like an Excalibur round. But the M109's 22-kilometer range is significantly lower than all the other systems that I've already brought up on this video. One of the biggest reasons for this is simply because the barrel is shorter than everyone else's. Paladins use 39 caliber barrels, which are about 6 meters. Most modern systems these days use 52 caliber barrels, which are about 8 meters. Now it's time for you, the viewer, to tell me which dick joke you would want me to insert right here. Good choice. I liked that one too. Now, Paladins do have armor. You would need something stronger than a standard assault rifle to take this thing out. But not much stronger than that. The armor on the M109 is primarily there to protect it from small arms fire and shrapnel from counter battery. One spray from a 50 cal, or God forbid anything bigger, and this puppy's gonna be feeling it. Now, compared to other self-propelled artillery, that's on par, if not slightly better, in terms of protection. Despite what War Thunder has taught you, you do not drive Paladins around trying to direct fire tanks. That armor is designed to protect it just long enough to get away from whatever's shooting at it. With that said, adding more armor is not a good idea, and taking it away entirely might actually be the better option. If any self-propelled gun is firing in self-defense instead of firing a fire mission, that crew is quite literally having one of, if not the, worst days of their entire lives. Because the cannon already weighs a metric fuckton, they're already slower compared to the tanks and IFVs they're expected to keep up with, so any extra armor is only going to add to that problem. Guns are more useful if they can move around faster to avoid getting hit in the first place than they are being tougher and able to absorb more punishment. That's one major reason why you see more and more countries moving towards wheeled designs with less armor than older tracked ones. You don't need to protect yourself from shrapnel if you aren't even where the shrapnel's landing in the first place. Paladins also don't operate alone. If you see one driving around, odds are that an M992 ammo carrier is right behind it. Having to move in pairs is going to make things slightly more annoying, and both of these vehicles have less range on a single tank of gas than the Bradleys and Abrams that they're supporting. Using tracks is fine, and they allow them to get to some places that they wouldn't be able to with just wheels. But they're slower, take up a lot more maintenance, and the trade-off of speed and less maneuverability is fine, but only if you have a longer range, because you don't have to get closer to the fighting to fire off your payload. The slower you are, and the shorter your range, means that it takes longer to get into a position and start blasting. And the longer it takes to start blasting, means the tanks and infantry either have to stop moving and wait, or just say fuck it, and risk it for the biscuit. That shorter range and slower speed is a big deal in the world of drone warfare, because the closer you are to the front line, and the longer you are there, is directly proportional to the chances that there will be a video of you getting blown up on a Russian Telegram channel. Now, why is it that despite the United States quickly closing in on a $1 trillion defense budget, that we can't just swap out these pieces of 60s tech and buy something better that already exists and is really just off the shelf? Well, we could, but that's not the American way. No, instead we have a long line of failed prototypes, broken dreams, and exploded procurement budgets with nothing to show for it. The Army first tried this with the Advanced Field Artillery System, which would have been a modular turret design and upgraded chassis, but that ended up being too complex, too expensive, and the Cold War ended, so once again, we got stuck with the M109. Right after that came the XM2001 Crusader, a name which I feel would do well with the Gen Z teenagers who are into those edits of Edward Norton pretending to be Baldwin IV. The main focus of the Crusader was increasing rates of fire, hence the inclusion of an autoloader. But it ended up being way too heavy, over 60 tons, which would have been fine if we were driving around the Fulda Gap, but not great because we decided to start shooting at tribal dudes living in the mountains. Donald Rumsfeld himself canceled the program in 2002, before then convincing America that we needed Gulf War Part 2. Less than a year later came the non-line of sight cannon, which I find weird as a name because a modern artillery piece that requires a direct line of sight is by nature fucking useless. Anyway, the goals of this program were pretty lofty, like integrated network firing and autonomous operation, to the point where we literally did not have the technology to develop it, at least in time for it to reach the force in any reasonable amount of time. Costs, of course, went through the roof, and it was canceled in 2009. If you look at the timelines of these programs, they quite literally have, at most, a few months between program canceled and new program beginning. And that wouldn't change until once again, we tried to replace the Paladin for the 5th time with the M1299 ERCA, or Extended Range Artillery Cannon, which started development in 2018. These were supposed to be a reasonably feasible jump in capability based on technology at the time. But the rate of fire was too slow, ammo capacity wasn't as high as we needed it to be, and the barrels kept frying themselves after pretty low numbers of shots, which kinda defeats the purpose in the first place. That thing got canceled back in 2024, and now we are still currently stuck with the M109. Right now, we don't really have a plan on replacing it, yet at least, and the Army just announced they're purchasing or procuring another 689 M109A7s, with the goal of keeping them around until at least 2050. That means that these bad boys will probably be celebrating their 100th year of service eventually. There have been announcements of finally just throwing in the towel and buying some already existing platforms like the RCH-155, which is probably one of, if not the best SPAs in the world right now, but we won't know where that's going until later this year. Now, even if you don't upgrade the howitzer itself, you can always upgrade the ammunition that it's firing. Right now, the Army is testing out no less than 7 experimental rounds that Paladins could fire. We do have fancy rounds with long ranges like the Excalibur round, which are relatively small warheads compared to a traditional high explosive one, and these use GPS to guide themselves onto a target with pretty insane sub-meter levels of precision. However, Russia has basically cracked the code on jamming these, and effectiveness of them over the last year in Ukraine has fallen to the point of them essentially being useless in a pure fight. The whole point of an Excalibur round is that it's incredibly precise with a smaller warhead, and if you remove the incredibly precise part of an Excalibur round, then it just turns into a really expensive and really shitty high explosive round that you might as well just throw away. Newer rounds like the XM1155 have reported ranges of over 110 kilometers, over double of the Excalibur, and can still hit moving targets in a GPS-degraded environment. New ramjet rounds developed by Boeing can apparently hit targets up to 150 kilometers away, and new developments on how to improve existing rounds against targets like tanks are also in the works. But why does the Army just not seem to be in that much of a hurry to replace the Paladin when basically every other country has? The answer is twofold. Number one is missiles, and number two, kind of related to number one, is the United States Air Force. Rockets and missiles have proven to be invaluable in modern warfare. Big shocker there. And while they're a lot more expensive, they've been the deciding factor in a lot of battles recently. DoD has placed them at a higher priority compared to traditional cannon artillery like the Paladin. And so while the desire to replace the Paladin is obviously there, there's only so much they're willing to spend on it. Secondly, the DoD just prefers to leverage the Air Force against targets that other countries would use artillery for. Roughly speaking, the gaps in targets that the Paladin can take out, and the gaps that a more modern system like the PZH-2000 can, is covered by the United States Air Force, and a missile from a plane is generally going to be more effective, albeit more expensive, than a fire mission from an artillery battery. It's easy to see worrying reports of us, quote, running out of artillery munition, and us planning on having a 100-year artillery piece, while being an interesting fun fact, is not the most comforting idea. However, we do not use artillery like other countries do. We just kind of prefer to use missiles if we can. Yes, it's naive to assume we would have instant air supremacy within 4 to 8 hours of a fight, but it's also naive to assume we wouldn't have at the very least air superiority, at least in significant enough ways that it would do the job just fine. Throw in the fact that infantry soldiers are being equipped with new munitions that would actually do the job of some standard artillery strikes, and the reason why the Paladin is still going to be around for a while starts to make more sense. But all that is to say, in this humble YouTuber's opinion, compared to everything else out there, the Paladin still kind of sucks. But so do I, and that's okay. And on that note, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.